Okay, maybe I can just start with my introduction. So my name is Simran, and I'm the founder of Power Women of India. I grew up in Calcutta, and when I was about 5 years old, we attended an event where the great Mother Teresa gave a speech. I was too little back then to understand the significance of the moment. But fortunately, a few years later, my father repeated to me what she had said that night. Not everyone can do great things, but we can all do small things with great love. And today, these words are so relevant for the world beyond 2020. The year has disrupted our lives in so many ways. It has stripped our minds to think of the most fundamental elements which impact us as human beings. This year, during the lockdown, my 6-year-old daughter sketched a little memory book and labeled it what she did in the past. Eating out with the family and going to the park had suddenly become things she did in the past, and how dramatically had our lives transformed. The global population today faces multiple man-made crises that threaten our very existence and the existence of our planet. Old models have failed miserably in the face of this crisis, and it is indeed time to build something new. And I firmly believe that women should not just be the builders of this new world, but also leaders of it. When I started my professional life, I did not think about topics such as the glass ceiling, the pay gap, or diversity and inclusion. As a young, ambitious girl, I came into the workforce believing that the playing field was level. Over time, I realized I needed to find the right networks and build a support system around myself to overcome these challenges. And hence, Power Women of India was born. At Power Women of India, we are building a community of exceptional women leaders, many of whom, with a little support and strong network, can become the CEOs of the future, can enter boardrooms, and build our next unicorns. Keeping this in mind, we have launched projects such as Project Knock Knock to bring women early on into advisory roles. We are collaborating with Founders Institute UAE and Loyal VC Canada to bring in more women advisors. This year, we collaborated with Asia Berlin Summit to position them as leaders, as thought leaders. And we are now in the process of launching a program to accelerate careers. We host a podcast to tell these stories and are starting a mentoring program to guide and support young female students in universities. Giving back is a key value of PWI. Overall, this pool of talent can make a huge difference, and we strongly believe that by doing this, we will be making the world a better place. Now, the problem that we are trying to solve is a big one, and this cannot be solved alone. Therefore, we continue to look for partners who support our vision, and today I'm grateful to INSEAD Emerging Markets Institute for coming in as our conclave partner, and especially to Dr. Rao for chairing this summit. Dr. Vinika Rao is the Executive Director of INSEAD's Gender Initiative and Emerging Markets Institute, and Director of the Hofmann Global Institute for Business and Society. She started her career with an MNC bank and went on to become the MD of an Indonesian conglomerate. Prior to INSEAD, Dr. Rao was the Associate Professor of Strategy at SP Jain. She has an MBA from IIM Bangalore and a PhD from Singapore Management University. Thank you, Dr. Rao, for chairing our summit today. Very, very grateful for that. And before I hand over, I just want to add one last comment. I know that many of the women who join us today sit at tables where we have had to fight to get a seat. And there have been countless times when we have not been heard, countless times we have been spoken over, and sometimes even dismissed. So one reason I'm so proud of our conclave today is because it is filled with amazing power women who will be speaking, and no one is going to interrupt or speak over them. And before I conclude, I do want to thank all the wonderful men who have joined us today. We really need more power men like you who stand as role models for equality at the workplace and in the world. So really thank you very much for taking time out and joining. With this, please join me in welcoming our awesome power ladies and awesome chairwoman, Dr. Vinika Rao. Thank you, Vinika. Hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Simran. What a wonderful way to start this summit. I love the red folding chair. I'm going to remember it.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. It's a really wonderful feeling to be here with so many of you. And depending on where in the world you're joining us from, a very good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I see that we have folks who've joined us from Prague, from Amsterdam, from Delaware, and I think I saw there was Hong Kong, there's UK, of course we have India and Singapore where I'm based. It's lovely to have such an international audience. And as Simran mentioned, to have a number of gentlemen along with the many power women that we have here today. So first of all, a big thank you to Simran for organizing this and for having me. And on behalf of INSEAD's Emerging Markets Institute, it makes us really proud to be here with you all today and to have our alumna doing such a great job at organizing this Power Women of India Conclave. Okay, so what we want to do now is, I'll give you a brief introduction to the first session that we're going to host and then move into introducing our panelists. Do we want to change the spotlight so we can make sure that we're spotlighting our speakers rather than Simran, who I'm not sure is going to be comfortable being spotlighted while I'm speaking to the other ladies? Who's managing this? Okay, no problem. We'll continue, and if we can request whoever is managing the spotlighting to ensure that it's the speaker that we're focusing on. There we go. Perfect. Thank you so much. All right. Okay, so now the ramifications of COVID-19 on all aspects of lives and livelihoods continue to manifest across the globe. I'm sure you'll all agree that this is a pandemic that has had truly international consequences. Scarcely any nation and any community has been left unscathed by it. Every day we hear new problems that are associated with it coming up and new challenges, but also opportunities that we hope we can leverage. Now, even as government and business leaders across the world continue to struggle with ensuring the survival of their nations and their communities, it's important to continue to focus on the broader, larger, more important challenges that face humanity today. And we will be discussing two of these very important aspects in this conclave. We'll start with a conversation on sustainability, and we'll go on to talk about balance. In the first session now, we'll address the topic of sustainability and business for good. Now, business as a force for good is a thought that's very important to us at INSEAD. It's integral to our vision. It's integral to everything we do. We aim to create, to help shape responsible leaders. And we want to empower our partners and the organizations we come in contact with to discover how the UN Sustainable Development Goals can be an integral part of every aspect of their value chains. To me personally, in my role as the director in Asia for the Hoffman Global Institute for Business and Society, this is also particularly important. Now, in many ways, COVID-19 has been a sort of wake-up call to us all. It's as if planet Earth is telling us that, if you're not going to look after what I've given you, I'm going to have to force your hand a little bit. So how do we make sure that this wake-up call does not go unheeded by our decision makers? How do we make sure that we are taking steps today in order to ensure the sustainability in the long term for our businesses and for our communities? Now, to help us answer some of these questions, we have a wonderful panel of speakers. So I don't want to take too much time. I want to start introducing them to you very quickly. But just before we start that, I want to repeat what Simran said. We want to make this an interactive discussion. We have such wonderful people joining us from all over the world. So I definitely want your questions to come in, and we'll try and take them as and when possible for our panelists. Okay, let me now quickly introduce our speakers to you. For our first session, we have with us Dr. Ruchi Saxena. She's the founder and director of Care Robotics and India Flying Labs. So Ruchi works on building ecosystems that bring futuristic technologies like unmanned aerial vehicles to the communities that need them most. Welcome, Ruchi. We have with us Urvashi Devidayal. Urvashi is the India lead at Conclave. She has worked in MNCs and NGOs and startups and is well known for her work in the social impact sector. I've personally worked with Urvashi before. Lovely to have you with us, Urvashi. We have also Dr. Vinika Rao, lecturer in entrepreneurship at CQ University in Australia. Vinika has worked on research publications, grants and awards, and editorial board memberships. Welcome, Vinika. We have also finally, but certainly not the least, Yosha Gupta, CEO and founder of Me Meraki in Hong Kong. Yosha works on driving financial inclusions for artisans by empowering them with technology and creating new economic opportunities for them. And I should also mention, we had a fifth panelist, also very interesting profile, Dr. Latika Nath. She's called the Tiger Princess of India. Unfortunately, she's had this really terrible bout of laryngitis, can't speak at all. So she's not participating in the discussion, but I'm sure she's with us in spirit, and she'll be with us in the audience as soon as she feels better. So what a spectacular group of women from such interesting, diverse backgrounds. And I want to just make sure that we optimize our time with them. So I'm going to delve into my first set of questions for them. And as soon as your questions start coming in, I'm going to try and read them and see how many we can address to our panel. Okay, so let me start off with, let's see, Yosha, let's go with you. Now, a very fundamental question to start us off, yeah? Talking about businesses and sustainability, what are the different elements of sustainability that businesses can incorporate into their practices? Now, sounds like a very sort of general question, but I'm hoping that it'll help us go off into the direction that we want to take. So over to you, Yosha.
Thank you for having me. And like you said, it does sound like a generic question. And in fact, it's a very big question actually, right? Because there's so many elements of sustainability, and it's a word which is thrown around a lot, right now, in fact, and it means very different things to, different people. But I will obviously take it in context of what we do and in context of the businesses that we sort of look up to as well. And hence what others can draw from it. I think in the context of the businesses that I really look up to and from whom we draw a lot of inspiration, I would say, Patagonia is, for example, one of the, companies which really embodies this whole concept. And their whole, the premise of the business is completely built on the idea of purpose before profit, and how they incorporate it into their overall business. It's brilliant. I mean, Yvonne Chouinard sort of highlights it really nicely in his book, Let My People Go Surfing, where he has these 8 core philosophies, and right from the idea of product design to production and to distribution, to how you actually portray and market your company, to the financial philosophy. And I think the financial philosophy actually is probably one of the most important things, because once you decide that you're building something for 100 years, which is what they say, that we're building our company to be in existence for 100 years, versus the idea of what are we optimizing in the short term, right? I think that financial philosophy has a huge shift in the overall mindset. And the idea of human resource philosophy, how you hiring, how you treating your employees, your vendors, your manufacturers, everyone in the supply chain who works with you, to the overall management philosophy, and ultimately the environmental philosophy and what impact your business has on the overall environment. I think all of that basically is these 8 philosophies are what we try and incorporate as much as possible into what we do as well. And to highlight, our business, Me Meraki, as you gave a short introduction about us. I mean, it started purely from a place of passion for the arts and heritage and traditional arts of India. And while we started as, a fashion brand where we were getting things hand painted by artists, but the mission of the business was always highlighted very clearly, that we are there to create sustainable livelihoods for the artisans and artists who work with us, right? So ultimately, every decision we take will start from there and boil down. Every decision we make, everything we do will ultimately have to lead up to that ultimate mission. So during COVID, actually, our business went fine, but during COVID, we really struggled, honestly, in March, April. Who wants to shop for a handbag or a fashion product, right? So that's when we realized that while we were struggling, our artist partners and our artists were struggling even more, because they depend on, either tourism or exhibitions where they can actually, sell their work as well. So it was a big, COVID has definitely had a very disproportionate impact on, more marginalized and especially the artist and creative communities as well. So we thought we need to do something. And to do that, what we tried to do is basically we started doing online art workshops with our artists, right? So in the last 6 months, we've done over 200 online art workshops attended by more than 4,000 people across the world, right? It has clearly created a new income stream for these artists. And, so the thing is that if we didn't have this mission in place, that we are there, our mission is to create sustainable livelihoods for our artists. we would have thought we're a fashion brand. What are we doing trying to get into this space ultimately? But because we had this mission, we were very purpose driven. Ultimately, whatever we do, has to go to that mission. So I call us a culture platform, and everything we do has to make sure that we are true to that mission. So I think that's what I would say, how we've incorporated sustainability for us. That's the one main mission. And I would say that, as a when you start a business, it's hard to sort of incorporate every element of sustainability. So it's important to stay true to one core to start with. And then, as long as the intent is there to make sure that it starts, all the other elements of sustainability start being added to your business as well. But having that one core is very, very important. And that's what we try and do in our business.
Okay, very interesting indeed. And before I forget, there's a request to get the name of the book that you referred to. Okay, so
I'll put it on the chat. It's called Yvonne Chenar is the founder of Patagonia. The book is called Let My People Go Surfing. It's brilliant, absolute must read.
Oh yes, okay, somebody did find it. Excellent, thank you. Okay, well, that's very interesting indeed. And sometimes we think about webinar fatigue with so many webinars happening, and then to hear you talk about how wonderfully you've used the workshop model for your artisans, I think that makes a huge difference and very, very impactful. And I love the idea of a culture platform. So thank you for sharing that, Yosha, lovely. And moving now to Vinika, and a similar question actually, again to set the ball rolling and to understand this whole idea of sustainability in business models from different perspectives. So Vinika, if I can ask you, what sustainable strategies do you think firms should adopt in order to survive this pandemic right now and succeed beyond it? And I know you're coming at it from a different aspect than Yosha, who's very specific. You're looking at it from a broader platform. So what are your views on that?
Thank you, Vinika. You raised a very valid point, and you're very right. I'm going to give a much more generic and a broader perspective rather than a very specific nature of the concept of sustainability. So it's a relevant question for nearly every organization that we're seeing today. What strategy? What for survival, for growth post-pandemic, and for survival in future going forward? Undoubtedly, with 2020, this year has been a year of unprecedented disruptions in our personal lives, disruptions in our work lives, disruptions for organizations, disruptions for governments and nations across the globe. So what we are witnessing is a humanitarian and an economic crisis. This will call for a more dedicated effort by both the public and the private sector players in seeking what? Wicked solutions. So it's a wicked problem and it requires wicked solutions. So the ongoing pandemic has suddenly accentuated the calls for a sustainable economy and a sustainable society. And we should not forget our planet, without which we will not survive. So a question of relevance here would be, for nearly every organization, how do we survive? And how do we grow? For this, organizations have to start listening to the voices of sustainability that have been in existence since the early 1900s. Those three fundamental pillars of sustainable development, primarily the economic, social, and environmental goals. Explicitly, they have to be imbibed in the corporate strategies. In the past, what we've seen and observed has primarily been an eyewash. But this has to change, and research shows that this is feasible. So how does that happen? And what's our magic formula here? I'm going to propose two key strategies for people who are tuned in, for people who would listen in future, what research tells us. So two key fundamental strategies for survival for firms going forward. The very first strategy is to start from the top, which means to incorporate the principles of sustainability as a part of the organization's corporate strategy. And more importantly, its corporate governance mechanisms. Then only it will get absorbed in the corporate decision making. It should be led from the top and be a part of the governance instrument. Now coming to the second strategy, simply operationalize it. Operationalize sustainability, which is more at an implementation level, at a firm level. one will need to define it, measure it within the organizational context, which might be different. As Yosha had given a context of her organization, another organization will have a totally different context and an industry setting. So one needs to define it and measure it within your organization context. It is important to understand that the notion of sustainability should not be a CSR initiative. I'm not saying CSR is bad. Look, what I'm trying to say here is CSR is a fringe initiative. And sustainability principles for a firm, for a firm's long-term survival, have to become a part of the core. They should not remain at the fringes. Therefore, firms need to move beyond the fringe measures and they need to become good corporate citizens by transforming the entire organization into a sustainability organization. So you may ask, how would you do this? For this, the firms need to embed the sustainability ideas in every aspect of their organization. Starting from the top, communication messages via the mission and vision statements, percolating through the processes, policies, reports, measurement frameworks, it should become a part of the organizational culture. As a result, what will happen? It will become a component of sustainability embedded everywhere. Now, let me give you an example how firms can do this. For example, if firms can look at ways to innovate their manufacturing processes. If I may ask you, what is the most prevalent approach to production systems in whatever part of the globe that you're joining us? Take from the environment, make some products, consume those products, and then do what? Dispose in the environment. No, this has to change. So this is the fundamental change that has to come in. If firms have to succeed and survive in future, they need to innovate their processes. In doing so, they will innovate their business models. For this, the organization can draw inspirations from concepts like circular economy. What does that mean in simple terms? Reuse, repair, refurbish, recycle. Innovation for sustainability will become an imperative, will become a driving force for the future. So to conclude and recap, they must imbibe in their corporate strategy, their governance frameworks, and simply operationalize it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinika. I'm sorry if I was interrupting a little bit. Just want to make sure we keep this going because
okay, no worries, no worries.
We want to ask. Perfect. Thank you. Absolutely. So great to have a broader view, and I see people, our listeners, agreeing with you in terms of how definitely sustainability has to be the core strategy. I think there's no doubt at all that it can no longer be something that we look at as CSR or a fringe strategy, and no question of doing that. So perfect. Thank you so much for that. Now, to move shift tracks a little bit, and to come to you, Urvashi. Now, you're working in the field with purpose-led companies, impact-driven companies, now the firms. Now, obviously, they're the sort of torchbearers when it comes to sustainability. And they've done very well, but they've not always had the necessary impact or the desired impact just because they're not mainstream. So we've spoken about this once before, and if you could share a little bit about how you think we can then perhaps bring these purpose-led companies, these sort of impact-driven companies for whom it is exactly as Vinika was suggesting, everything that they do is really related to sustainability. Can we mainstream them? What are some steps that we can take in this direction?
Thanks so much for this, Vinika. And I just wanted to say quickly, thank you to the speakers that came before me. I mean, Simran, Yosha, Vinika, you'll have all said so much great context. It's always difficult to come after great speakers. And Vinika, I completely agree with you. CSR is not the solution at all. It needs to be embedded. And, I mean, in terms of, the work we are doing and where we feel like impact-led businesses can be mainstream is a lot of our focus is on entrepreneurs. And one of the things on entrepreneurs that right from the start of their strategy have put impact or sustainability into the the mission of business, right? And definitely in terms of where, you really see the strength of these businesses come out and especially within this pandemic, is that a lot of these impact-led businesses, you want to call them social enterprises, social businesses, they've really been on the front lines of actually reaching the vulnerable communities across the world. So where government was not able to reach, where sort of aid workers were not able to reach, these businesses were really out and present. And I'm sure Yosha would sort of agree with that in terms of her work with artisans. The support is not just about sort of giving aid or government schemes, it's really about creating livelihoods. And really that is where you see that the need to support these entrepreneurs is very essential. And really the way that it has to happen is that capital has to think differently, right? Capital has been led very much by this one philosophy that capital's only sort of purpose is to create more capital, more greed, more profit. But this is where we collectively need to think differently and collectively need to say that capital has more purpose than just creating more capital for everybody else. And that's where impact really comes into it. So can it be mainstream? Yes. And definitely, I think the trends that we are seeing across the world in terms of more and more investments going more and more, what is termed as impact investing, like that, what we really hope is in 10 years, there is no term called impact investing. It's just investments in these entrepreneurs, right? I know Yosha's smiling because she's probably gone out for investments a number of times and sort of dealt with this. So the point I wanted to make was two. One is that capital needs to think differently about what their purpose is. And the second thing I wanted to make a point on was on demand. And the demand really comes from all of us, right? Where we work, how we work, where we buy, what we consume. And I think that's, a lot of the times businesses led by what society demands of them. And I really wanted to sort of thank Simran for putting this together, because it's really also sort of women as decision makers, women as consumers, and the role of women comes out here a lot more also, is that what we put out into society is what we're going to get in the next 10, 20 years. So I wanted to flip that a little bit about saying that impact businesses can be impacted, can be mainstream if really by the choices that we make. So I'll stop there, and I know you have a lot to cover in this panel, so we can come back to this also.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you, Urvashi. And we'll talk a little bit more about demand and how consumers really can create more sustainability. So perfect. And a great thought to take away from what you just said in terms of capital needs to think differently. Absolutely. And I wanted to mention that we have the INSEAD International Directors Network, Agan, who's saying that sustainability does belong on the boardroom agenda. And that's something that they're working on. So absolutely agree with you there, and glad to hear that, Agan. Very, very good to know that. Okay, I'd like to move now to Ruchi. And again, bringing in a slightly more nuanced view. Now, Ruchi, you work in the very sort of high-tech sector, and you're looking at tech-based solutions for solutions for people who are perhaps the most economically disadvantaged sections of society, right? To try and bridge those gaps. So how do you think we can prepare the next generation of leaders for sustainable, socially impactful tech-based solutions that can help to bridge these inequalities that are such a big problem today?
Hi, Vinika. Hello, everybody. So I would like to just give a context from where I'm coming and what we do. We are using drones and drone-based solutions. So basically data from the aerial images and the videos for maybe solving some major challenges that we see in the world. And these challenges that we are trying to solve are in the sector of disasters, disaster management and disasters reduction, healthcare, agriculture, conservation, various sustainable development initiatives, even youth empowerment. So what we have been seeing over the last couple of years of my, at least, engagement with drones is, it's kind of divided. The world is divided into a sector of the world which has everything. So for example, if I live in Mumbai, I would have the medical store right at my doorstep. So I just have to step out of my building and I would get the medicines that I require. But it's not the story for, let's say, 80% of the world. So if I just travel from 25 kilometers away from Mumbai, I would still have people living in places which are at least 20 kilometers away from the nearest health facility. And this is the truth. I also live in Nepal, where I've seen people still walk for 6 hours before they reach the nearest health facility. And and we have been working with disasters. So when we travel to places, let's say on the eastern coast of India, where are states like Odisha and West Bengal, and we watch these places, you know that these are the communities which face disaster every year. Every year you would have a cyclone or a flood or something or the other affecting them. But these are the people who repeatedly get affected by them. So we talk about sustainability. Somewhere resilience is a part of it. And what we mean by that is, how are these communities ready to take care of themselves? When we work with youth, we prefer to work with youth from these communities because they probably feel for their pain more than us. So maybe I from Mumbai would never understand the pain of a person living in Puri, right? But if a person from Puri itself learns technologies, is able to go back to his villages, collect the data with drones, and then use the information from that data to work with their own communities to maybe build better houses or build better roads or build maybe a different kind of farming technique so that you don't have the repeated farming loss that you're watching. So this is the sustainability that we're trying to inculcate by selectively working with youth, especially the children, because children, if you prepare them today, 10 years down the line, they'll be ready for the emerging technologies. If they watch everything today and they repeatedly feel that, what, government isn't doing enough for us. But it's not always the government to be blamed. It's also the people who have to take charge of their own problems. So the inclusiveness that we talk about, that is a very important part of what we do. So when we talk about educating the children today, we have national education policy coming in, which we talk about like coding for the children. That's okay. But what about the problems that you are facing every day? Are the kids even thinking about that? Today, if you talk about drones to children, the first application that they think about is dropping bombs. Why do kids talk about that? But they don't talk about all the amazing applications that technologies can do. They also know about all the destructive things that technologies can do. So when we start preparing them today, include them in the projects that we are doing, at least make them simulate the problems that they see around themselves. It could be a river overflowing, it could be a broken bridge, it could be houses that are repeatedly facing maybe what do you call that? They repeatedly face the disasters and they get destroyed. They still continue to live in those houses. There is remuneration and hundreds of crores being spent by the government in rebuilding the community, but nobody knows where that goes. And you see the same situation in Kerala, you see the same situation in the Northeast and the North, right? So somewhere for me, it's very important that when I talk about technology, it's not just about me and whatever money comes into my company, it's also about the future that we're trying to build. And that future depends on the children that we are trying to work with today. It's very important that we include them in our design, we include them in our projects. And whatever we do, we always keep them in focus that 10 years down the line, they will be leading the world. So what example we as adults leave today, they would be carrying it forward. That's what I have, Vinika.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And indeed, the children are going to play a very important role in this. And it is possibly why they're so concerned about the planet we're leaving for them. So absolutely, very important.
Did we lose Vinika?
Hello, everyone. Looks like we just lost Vinika. Let's give her a few seconds.
I'm back. I'm not sure what happened exactly.
Good.
Okay. Well, sentence and thanking Ruchi for what she said. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. So, there was reference to consumer and what we can do as consumers in order to drive the way, sustainability will move in the future. So perhaps let's address that a little bit. And if I can ask Yosha, your comments in this. We have this old adage of the customer is the king. Now, it has value when it comes to sustainability too, especially if consumers start to demand sustainability. And more importantly, if that's where they put their money, if they talk with their wallets, then it is going to have impact. Now, we see some examples of this. There are some interesting instances, and, of course, we probably all have some examples. But again, it's not enough. Right? Mm-hmm. So how do you see that we can make consumers more aware about the need for sustainability? Ruchi was talking earlier about getting children involved, but I think the problem here lies more with us adults than it does with kids. So how do we increase this awareness with consumers and, sort of force businesses to start thinking about it?
So absolutely, Vinika. I mean, in fact, that's critical what you said about, like, while consumers might be getting more aware. So, awareness is obviously a challenge. And while they might be getting more aware, but are they actually willing to put, their money where their mouth is, for the lack of a better adage? Because, if you look at a lot of research, I was just looking at some latest research by a company called Getty Images, where they actually surveyed more than 10,000 people globally, asking them about, sustainability and whether they'd buy from sustainable brands and are they eco-friendly or not. So while 80%, 81% respondents actually said that, they see themselves as eco-friendly, but only 50% actually said that they buy products from brands that are eco-friendly, right? And at the end of the day, consumers are willing to sacrifice the ideal of sustainability for convenience and price, right? Again, going back to my favorite example of Patagonia, if you just Google and start searching for Patagonia, some of the first few results that you'll see is, why are Patagonia products so expensive, right? So, I think that mindset, that shift is so important, because while we often think of, why are these products so expensive? It's not expensive. It's exactly the right price. It's everything else that you're used to as consumers, which is too cheap and not the right price, right? I think that's the mindset shift, which is really, really important for consumers, that sustainable products aren't expensive. They're exactly the right price. It's actually everything else which you're getting too cheap. And when you're getting it too cheap, you need to question that who's getting impacted because of that, right? Obviously, it has impacts, in terms of wages which are being given to people, in terms of the environmental impact it has. So I think that's the awareness that really, really needs to be created. And for example, Patagonia has done a fabulous campaign on this, which has been one of the most popular campaigns, which, they talk about, they have this jacket, and their jackets are, like I said, everyone thinks of them as expensive, but they actually market it as, don't buy this jacket, right? Because it's their whole concept of reuse, repair, recycle as much as possible. And they actually stay completely true to that adage, that, they actually send a truck across different cities where people can give their old clothes, or they can actually get their old Patagonia jackets and all repaired as well, right? And the idea was that, prevent consumers from buying too many things. At the end of the day, that mindset has to change. And obviously marketeers have a huge role to play in that, right? And even with us, so coming to specific examples about how we try and do it as well, I think we struggled with that at the beginning, to be honest, because the idea of artisanal and why artisanal things are expensive, it wasn't completely clear to people. So only after we started doing these art workshops, actually, when people started creating together with the artists, when they started seeing how much effort it takes, when, like, now more than 4,000 people who've attended these workshops, they completely understand it, because they see that, it is the amount of effort that goes into making something, and hence it is exactly the right price for a product like this, right? So I think the idea of community, I feel, has become very central to this tenet of how to make sure that consumers can get more aware and can start being evangelists for such as well. I think so community is very important, and that's what has helped us take this movement forward. And most of the brands that we see who are being able to drive the idea of sustainability, the idea of community marketing is very, very important. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. I think if I can request everyone who's not speaking to just have their mics off, please. I think we're getting a bit of disturbance. So if you're not speaking, please switch your mic off. Thank you so much. Okay. Indeed, Yosha, and the one thought that you mentioned early on in when you were talking is something that's, again, it's a simple thought, but so important, that sustainable products aren't too expensive, everything else is. Now that's going to require a mind shift, because unfortunately we have gotten used to t-shirts that cost $5, and we've gotten used to everything being ridiculously cheap and hence very easy to throw away, and therefore increase the burden on our planet in terms of what we're throwing away. So absolutely, and that's a shift. But again, interestingly enough, it seems to work better with the youth. I know my daughter finds it much easier to accept that. I still sometimes react to, especially prices in Singapore when we're looking at anything artisanal, and it can be quite expensive. But it's true, and it's just this feeling that we had, this thinking in our minds that we need to get used to, that it's not that this is too expensive, it's just that everything else has been made ridiculously cheap, and that's where the real cost comes in. So important thought, and thank you for that. And we've had some interesting comments that I think all of you are also looking at in terms of some suggestions for more reading. and what companies can do. Just before I take some of those, if we have time, I wanted to make sure that I can address another question to Ruchi that I thought was important that came up earlier when we were doing a pre-panel sort of conversation. And that was, to moving away from the consumer, moving towards the policymaker now. When it comes to emerging technologies that you're dealing with, Ruchi, the template in terms of policy is still being drafted, right? Things are changing where we have concerns about, how is policy going to be written for them, and, many things in terms of governance, etc. But maybe we have an opportunity here because it's all so new as far as emerging technologies are concerned. So how do you think we can be more inclusive, more human-centric right now, when as these templates are being set in place for drafting systems and policies for emerging technologies?
Yes, Vinika. So what we need to understand is here, when we're talking about emerging technologies, and not just drones, it could be artificial intelligence, it could be data, and whatever you have, whatever we see these days, it could be social media, it could be Facebook, or it could be anything. So we need to come back to our drawing board. When we talk about human-centered design, we always talk about designing everything, keeping humans in the center. So whom are we keeping in the center of these designs? And is it, let's say we talk about drones itself. So is it the drone companies that you're talking about? Is it the drone service providers or the drone photographers? Or is it the community that you're trying to film or you're trying to picture? Who is benefiting from whatever you do? Okay. We have an amazing application, drones for agriculture, wherein you can do precision agriculture and find out exactly the kind of health the crop has or what does it need, But instead of using it to improve the lifestyle or the livelihood of the farmers, there is an opportunity for an insurance company to ensure that, if we have this data available with us, we would probably have to minimize the payouts to the farmers. So it's benefiting a corporate or it's benefiting a government, not much the farmers. So when I talk about human-centered inclusiveness, I want to ensure that first figure out whom are you trying to impact with your solutions and whether that solution will ultimately reach them. So if you're collecting data, let's say you're collecting data about households, you're collecting data about roads, you're collecting data about education, how does the data come back to the communities and how do they make the best use of it to improve their own futures, the future of the children, the future of their current livelihoods, and how do they understand if you use their data to, let us say, make your Facebook more powerful or make your own business more powerful? Are they included in that? Did you go back and ask them whether you want a policy like that? Do they understand the ethical framework of your work? A lot of us are working, let's say, with grassroots workers or villagers or artisans or farmers. How much are we including them in the policy making that we do? Or it's just the corporates who decide what policy should be the best for the country? Or just the commerce chambers that we have in every country, they decide what's the best, right? So I think the community has to be involved somewhere. You have to go down to them, talk to them in their own language, make them understand the entire aspect of whatever you're creating for them, and include them in the sustainability that you're creating for them.
Indeed, the idea of being more inclusive, bringing in the community that the laws are being created for, absolutely resonates. But I don't know if our policymakers are listening. I don't think we have anyone on this chat. But the conversation has to start somewhere, and absolutely. And I think these conversations we're having about more inclusion, at least when it comes to something like emerging technologies, where the slate is clear, where we have an opportunity. Hopefully people will take that on. So that's great. And I also wanted to refer to a few of the comments that have come in, very interesting in terms of shifting the time frame of our purchases. We had a comment from Vera who spoke about, in reaction to Yosha, your favorite example of Patagonia, in terms of how the jackets are, they're expensive, but then they're expensive for a reason. And Vera talks about how, well, they are expensive, but the quality is so good that you can keep wearing the same jacket for 20 years. And you feel good about what you're wearing because it's been sustainably created. So absolutely, that the idea of a time frame shift of our purchases, I thought was really very interesting. Now we have a few more minutes, and before we sort of try and wrap this up, I want to have one question that I want to address to Urvashi, which which will be sort of a nice conclusion to this panel and a nice segue to the next panel discussion that we will be hosting here. And so, Urvashi, in the next segment, we'll talk a little bit about gender balance, the fact that, which is such an important part of sustainability. When we talk about the UN Sustainable Development Goals, gender balance, development, empowering women is right up there. SDG 5, very important in that conversation. Now, one of the things that I know you personally have experience with, and something that I hear all the time from our collaborators, is the idea that if women sort of create businesses, or if it's primarily women that are leading a business, often the investment dollars are very difficult to come by, right? And there was some reference to this earlier in the discussion, that even though we know that when we look at research into how women-led businesses or women-founded businesses do in terms of return on investment, they often do better than some of their comparable businesses run by male counterparts, or at least as well, but it's still very difficult to do this. So how do you think we can start driving or pushing more capital and support in the direction of women-led businesses? Urvashi, that's for you. Yeah.
Thanks for that question. Definitely, I mean, since we have two amazing women entrepreneurs on this panel, I think we could have spent a lot more time on this question itself. But, I mean, in our experience with Conclave and with the Avishkar group, I can share some bits where we feel that two interventions are really needed. One is the institutional approach, and it goes back to what capital expects from their investments, right? And how capital behaves. And, a lot of that, when you nuance it down, goes to who are the decision makers when it comes to capital, right? Are there enough female fund managers? Are there, like gives to like, and that's the same for, when we're having conversations on a broader level of equality across the world. But definitely when it comes to women entrepreneurs, are there any women on the table at all? Are there any people that you can sort of relate to? It also comes down to, aspects of networks. And again, I go back to, networks like this. It's important, right? Who you network, who you know, and how capital sort of comes to you. That's an important thing. So I think the institutional aspect of it is really important. And, then the flip side of it is really, in terms of directing more capital towards women entrepreneurs, it's how much women entrepreneurs actually ask for. At Conclave, just a month ago, we organized a female founders deal room. And, we were actually surprised that, the amount of capital that the women were asking was not sort of relevant to the companies that they were sort of representing. They could have asked for a lot more. I think at the top end of the budget, we had, one entrepreneur asked for like $4 million, but still, I mean, that was nothing compared to what the pool of, the ask was there. And, we see the numbers that come in from, male entrepreneurs, or even, sort of, it's just different. So it's also sort of what women are allowed to ask for, or what women think that they are capable of asking for. So it's a bit of a demand and supply equation on both ends of it that we need to work on. So to direct more capital towards women entrepreneurs, women also need to be more upfront and center. And I know that's a progress, and that's going to happen across, when the ecosystem supports you, right? So, I mean, definitely, things like a business school taking on the fact that the UN SDGs is something that is integral to all businesses makes a big difference, right? Because everybody needs to think alike. That's Simran, thanks for that. We work actually raise more money than female founders across the world, right? So I'll leave it at that to say that the two approaches really need to work from the demand and supply thing. And I think the way that women approach finance really needs to change. The way the risk appetite women have, the ask that they make, it's a lot of a behavioral change that can happen. And definitely, sort of linking it back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of, can we have more sustainable businesses and impact-led businesses go mainstream? Women as female founders are definitely far more empathetic, far more sort of aware of different parts of their businesses. So yes, we would love to see sort of more capital go towards that.
Thank you for that, Urvashi, and thank you for wrapping it up just in time for my, time up with this one. I have 1 minute left, and I want to refer to a comment from Gabish, who talks about how he resonates with what Ruchi was telling us in terms of small level stakeholders being involved in policy making. So absolutely, and that's something that I think really will go a long way when we talk about inclusion, to be able to include the people for whom these policies are really being written. So thank you for that comment, Kavish. And in the 30 seconds that I have left now, I want to quickly say a big thank you to this very impressive panel of speakers that we've had from different fields, very different sort of interests, people I don't get to meet as often as I would like to. So I'm so thankful to you all for the time that you've spent with us. And I think if we can talk about this for a very long time, and I know I can see from the reactions that we're getting also from our audience, this is something that's very close to everybody's heart, and many more aspects that we can debate going forward. So I do want to say thank you, not just to our panelists, but also to everyone who's listening in and sending some really interesting comments and reactions. It's been a wonderful discussion so far. Thank you all. And Simran, over to you. Do you want to go straight into the next panel, or do you want to take a second to say something? Thank you again, ladies. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vinika. Yes, it was really, really interesting. I was also taking notes, some very impactful statements made. Purpose-led companies, purpose before profit, and how sustainability has to become the core, how we all can make a difference, top to bottom. And I just shared one article which I found very interesting, because Urvashi mentioned a few things about how some things that entrepreneurs need to do, but I do believe that things have to change in the ecosystem as well. As our PWI ambassador Aviva says often, it's less about fixing women and more about fixing the workplace and the ecosystem around it. So this is a nice HBS article written by Claudia Zeisberger and I think Monisha Vardhan and the founder of Loyal VC, Kamal. And I think they do really good work at Loyal VC in terms of how to remove bias when they select entrepreneurs for the funding. So thank you all. It's been very exciting. And Vinika, over to you for the next panel.
Perfect. Thank you, Simran. Indeed, and we do have a panelist from Loyal VC in the next discussion, so good to have you refer to them. Okay, so now moving next to this, our session on gender balance. On a somber note, even as we talked earlier about nations and businesses continuing their battle for survival through the pandemic, when all of this is happening, when so much is going wrong, it's possible to overlook the sometimes less obvious but highly insidious impact that COVID-19 is having on gender balance. And we know that we've made some progress, but it's been very hard one, and it's taken a very long time. And to have it disrupted now by the pandemic is something that, unfortunately, early evidence is beginning to suggest that if our business leaders and our government leaders don't start to take effective decisions, and if we don't all act in this regard, then this pandemic will end up disproportionately impacting women. It already is, and this thing can go further. So that's what we want to discuss a little bit about, how we can prevent COVID-19 from dismantling the progress that we've made so far as SDG 5, as far as gender balance in our societies and in our workplaces is concerned. Now, to discuss these questions with us, I'm going to start inviting our panelists now. We have, again, a very interesting panel of speakers. We have with us Dr. Anjali Kulkarni. She's an oncologist and director of Day-to-Day Health. She's a trained cancer specialist and clinical expert. Welcome, Anjali. We have Hemlata Gupta, who's the AVP for Siemens Technologies and Services in India. She heads their audiology business and leads a team of more than 150 young minds. So we need our young minds to be led well, so thank you for that, Hemlata. We have with us Debasmita Dasgupta, who's an artist and founder of Arts Positive here in Singapore. She's also a published author, illustrator, and screenwriter. Welcome, Debasmita. We realize we're both in Singapore, and we will definitely meet up after this. We also have with us Anantika Kumari, who's HR advisor banking in the UK. She's passionate about building organizational culture to sustain high-performing teams, certainly something that we're all very excited and interested in. Do we have Anant? Yeah, there we go. Anantika is there with us. And we finally also have with us Niti Virmani, who's LP and advisor for Loyal VC in South Korea. Niti has a proven track record of driving business performance across diverse sectors. So lovely to have you all with us. And again, we want to continue the interactivity of this discussion. So absolutely keep sending in your comments and your questions and as we go along. So perfect. Let me start off immediately with a first round of questions, because again, very interesting panel and lots of things we want to ask you. So let me start with you, Anantika. You know, before we get into specific actions that we can take for continuing gender balance, etc., perhaps it's useful to take a step back and think about who is the modern woman. You know, what does she really need and want? Because this has evolved over the years, and our policies and practices need to evolve also, right? So tell us, how does this narrative around the representation, the whole idea of representation, need to change for today's woman? How do we make sure that we are keeping pace with the evolving needs of women?
Sure. Thanks, Vinika, for that. And I think a great segue, as you said, from you know, some of the last comments that we heard on the previous panel. You know, I strongly believe that you know, for a very long time, this the whole feminist viewpoint in business and politics has been around, you know, getting women a seat at the table because they're capable. So, you know, it's almost like we're sort of convincing people that women are capable. But I don't know about all of you, but I'm, you know, surely quite tired of hearing this viewpoint. And as we saw in our last panel, we have, you know, we've proven success. You know, we've got women who are breaking the glass ceiling, are leaving legacies behind. You know, so I think we're way past that proving our capability point. Rather, you know, we're almost at a stream where, you know, we should be given a seat at the table, not because we're only capable, but because we've proven success, and it's what is rightfully ours. And I think that is where the feminist narrative, in my opinion, really needs to change, to reflect that change and that development that we've seen over the years. And, you know, the quote that, you know, Simran started the panel with is great, right? You know, what Shirley Chisholm said, you know, if you don't get a seat, bring your own damn chair, you know, and sit there. And I think, you know, if I just take, you know, politics as an example, and you know, you see less and less women being represented on the political stage, even though women have proven a far better success rate as compared to their male counterparts. If you just take India, for example, and if you look at the stats, you will see women candidates, when fielded by political parties, fare far better than their male counterparts. But what is still lacking in our representation is the gatekeepers, the access to this particular stage, which is held by very often male leaders in political parties who continue to only give tickets in what is a single digit, in single percentage to women candidates as compared to men really. And I think that needs to change, because you need to rightfully represent what is rightfully the 50% of the population.
Thank you for that, Anantika. And you know, the whole idea of proving capability being, long proven and sort of not something we should be focusing on. Absolutely agree with you. And in fact, I wanted to refer to something that Srijata said, a comment that that has now disappeared from my screen. But in any case, what she was talking about was exactly what you're saying. It's less about fixing women and more about fixing the ecosystem and sort of understanding that. So completely agree with you there. And you spoke about political leaders who've clearly done much better, a lot of women who've done extremely well. We all have our heroines. My personal favorite is, of course, right, not very far from where I live in New Zealand. And I'm sure we all have, Jacinta right up there. But yes, absolutely. So that has gone a long way, I think, in people realizing that at the very helm of affairs also, having a woman in charge can make such a huge difference. So absolutely agree with you there. And just staying with this whole idea about leadership models and how they need to evolve for the evolving woman. Hemlata, coming to you, I know you're interested in the idea of empathetic leadership, and that's something that we talk about also as an sort of evolving leadership model that works across genders, but perhaps has particular relevance when it comes to minorities or genders that have been discriminated against in the past. So can I get your comments on that?
So when it comes to empathetic leadership, I think there's a way forward, right? In the current situation of which the pandemic has thrown us, everybody had to switch to remote working. There was no choice given, and people had to switch to remote working overnight. So with this, it brought in lots of challenges, right? Now, suddenly people were thrown into a confined space or in a very restricted environment where there was a big blend of their personal and professional life. And with this, there's lots of stress that comes in and lots of anxiety that comes in, and that is where the leaders now have to put in their empathetic hat, and empathize with people and support them in going through this journey and going through this stress and the requirements. So empathetic leadership will be the need of the hour in this post-pandemic, the new normal that is going to be defined. Having said that, I think also leaders need to be aware of the situation and switch on the gear and choose their leadership style as required for the situation. What I mean is, if there is a fire, you need a leader to get up and say, "There is the exist." Right, let's move towards it. Or if your ship is sinking, you need a leader who can say that, okay, let's do so and so. Right, there you cannot expect a democratic kind of leadership. You can't wait and sit and have a board meeting and discuss on what is the best strategy. You need somebody who is very decisive. So depending on the situation, I think leaders need to have the capability to adapt their leadership style. Having said that, with the new normal that is going to come in, where remote working and flexible working becomes the talk of the day, I think having empathy and showing empathy towards your employees and being with them uh, throughout will become a basic requirement for all leaders.
Absolutely. So suit your leadership style to the situation, and especially when the situation is as different and as disruptive as the one that we are facing now. It is, we talk about the new normal, but I think in many ways the disruption continues in quite an extreme measure. So thank you for that. And we'll come back to the whole idea of remote working. That's very interesting. And, we want to have some questions around that. But just before we go into that, because we have Neeti with us, and because, we had that question from the last panel about women founders, I think maybe I want to just address a few questions on related to those aspects. Now, we've talked a lot, and there's a lot of work done on how, in spite of all the efforts that organizations have taken, HR leaders like the ones, some of whom we have here with us today, in spite of all that, the number of women in leadership positions, whether it's senior management or it's board positions, is still ridiculously low, and we can almost never talk about parity. We are far from that in most countries. There are some notable exceptions, but then they do tend to still be exceptions. So, and this is also something that's very close to my heart. It's my personal research interest in terms of corporate leadership, and I look specifically at Asia, but it applies elsewhere too. So, Neeti, how do you see the sort of leadership roles for women evolving in the post-pandemic era? What are some steps that we can start to take now, given that we're already very far behind parity anyway, but what are some steps that we can take to ensure that at least we don't disrupt what we've achieved, and hopefully we can do more in the post-pandemic world?
Thank you, Dr. Vinika, and it's such a pleasure to have heard so many, panel members in the earlier panel as well as this one. Such inspiring and such relevant views have come in. I think very rightly said in the other, in the earlier panel also, the fact that the pandemic has disturbed that flow which was happening. Women were right at the assuming the center stage, and they were absolutely prepared. They had a lot of women had come out of their limiting beliefs. They had moved to confidence, and they were ready to really take on those positions. And here the pandemic comes and hits, and it has hit in to an extent that the already the stress which women had, balancing work and the home front, it just doubled up and increased further. And to some extent, a lot of organizations, as we know, had to streamline. When they had to streamline the staff, the women were the soft targets. But at the same time, we have seen, like Hemlata and Anantika were discussing that they one is that senior leadership positions have been assumed in this crisis, and it's actually the worst situations where the leadership gets tested, and women leadership has come out really strong. It may not be in numbers, but qualitatively it has really come out strong. If we look at since the time of the industrial era, it's the first time where if we see, at home, women and men are actually able to understand each other. Men are able to understand women's work far better. They are, for the first time, they are able to see women in action, and they're seeing how, all this while they were struggling and grappling with work and home together. So I think that itself, I have a strong feeling that it's going to get in a lot of empathy from even the men, and a lot of engagement is expected to go up from the men, and they are going to be allies, for the women to progress further. Also from the organization side, it's a great opportunity for women to be involved, and something which earlier and having worked in corporate, I still remember, there were like glares that we used to see sometimes coming at us when we used to say, a few hours and I can work from home. So it was, there was a certain stigma attached to working from home, which is going, and the organizations are really appreciating it, organizations are respecting it, and even the men are respecting, because while there was a stigma, yes, even with the women, there was a bigger stigma with the men. Why should I be working from home? So that is also changing as I see, and I'm expecting it will change further. So yeah, I think these are some of the things which are going to change in the coming times. Organizations, the traditional organizations, like I said, who never looked at work from home, they are, the senior HR heads are, I was reading, they're talking about never being able to go back to the absolute normal, but having, a hybrid situation where there's work from home plus the old style of working. So yeah, I think it's going to go up, and um, increasingly, the women, with the ecosystems which are, here, like Simran's is one of the ecosystem, and there are so many other ecosystems which are providing that support to women. These ecosystems are going to really be helpful, because there are people, there are women who are working with a lot of those setups, like, it was mentioned, and Simran talked about Loyal VC. 33% of the women founders are there with Loyal VC, which is very different from most of the other venture capital funds. And increasingly, I think this awareness is increasing. It was already there pre-COVID. The COVID has just taken it up. Women's, traditional strengths, which was to do with collaborative approach, motivational styles, are no longer going to be looked at as a stigma. They are the ones which are going to be the strength, in the post-COVID situation, because we need more of it. Like Lata was talking about, emotional intelligence to be increased. So I think keeping those in mind, I'm expecting, yes, it's very unfortunate that, COVID had to happen for us to really make ourselves, or, the industry realize about it. But while there is a negative aspect to it which has happened, I feel there's a whole lot of positivity which is going to come out, and that's going to be the way forward, in my opinion. I think I'll stop now, and maybe we can come later.
Sure.
Thank you,
you.
Dr.
Yes.
Vinika.
Absolutely. And, we will come back to remote working and all of that, because I know that's something that people are interested in. And we've had some interesting reactions to what's been said. One thing that you talked about earlier in terms of, the involvement of the family, and how, for instance, the sort of the boundaries between work and home, of course, have disappeared. And so to a lot of us, we're becoming aware about things about each other's lives that we didn't know about. We all know now who has a cat and who has a dog, and who does a lot of cooking, and in whose house what happens at various times of the day. And it's great. I mean, in some ways, it's, I think, made us much more aware that we all have lives to lead beyond work. And you're absolutely right, it has modified the way we think about each other and as professionals and as employees. So that's great. We'll talk more about that. And in fact, just, because there's some information around articles, we had some interesting practitioner-focused articles that came out in INSEAD Knowledge. And if my colleague Wai is around, and perhaps she can share some of these names with you, some articles. And one of those actually was on the role that the family can play, and how, it's not enough for women or anyone actually to have support in the workplace. It's also very important for the family to support it, because of some of the aspects that both Hemlata and Neeti, you touched upon, in terms of how, there's so much more to do right now. And COVID has created all sorts of interesting things. So there we go. Wai, thank you. She's already given you some of the articles that we are, that I was referring to. And by the way, Neeti, congratulations on 33% of female founders with you. I'm looking forward to seeing it go to 50% very quickly, but 33% is a great place to start. Moving now to Devasmita, and a very different set of questions that I want to introduce here. So along with everything else that this year has brought to us, Devasmita, we've also had in 2020 a resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, right? It started in the US, it moved on to other parts of the world. Here in Asia, where a lot of us are based, race is not something we've talked about very comfortably. In the US, in North America, it gets talked about more, in some other countries. But now that conversation has started to spread. And for the first time, we're beginning to talk about it in Asia also. And it's relevant, especially in the context of this discussion, because when we talk about women of color, we're talking about a double whammy in terms of the inequalities that women of color face. Of course, there's the inequalities related to the gender, then there's also inequalities related to race. So I know this is of interest to you. So tell me a little bit about, you see yourself as, I think you mentioned, art for change advocate, which I found very interesting. So how do you see the future for women of color in leadership?
Thank you so much, Vinika, and thank you everyone. Like, I've been hearing this really, really interesting conversation. Vinika, it's very interesting that you pointed about this whole Black Lives Matter movement, because that particular campaign showed us that it's not just, that problem is not just confined to Black people, it is also about others. And that's where change starts to happen. I think when we are talking about the future of women of color in top positions, the change one has to understand is that the change has to start at a very early stage. Most of the time, what we're saying is we are reaching at a certain level and then we are talking about it. Whereas this process, this has to start at a much earlier stage. And in terms of my work, I could actually say, that's why I spend a lot more time working with children and young adults, because that's where I feel that when you start exposing them to different stories, and I'm a visual storyteller, whether it's graphic novels or screenwriting for cinema, that is something that I've always tried to do, that I want to share with my readers the stories which has that power or that ability to change, or to make at least change happen. Because the more you see these stories around you, the more you start believing in representation, the more you see yourself. And this is not just about, like you said about the Black Lives Matter movement, it's not just, any change will not happen when you think that the ownership or the responsibility is only upon you. It is a collective movement. It has to be a collective action. And when collective action we are talking about, it's not an overnight thing that is going to happen. We are really talking about a mindset change. We are talking about behavioral change. And behavior change, in the previous panel, we also discussed about this gap between knowledge and practice, right? We have a really wealth of information, but do we actually make it into our practice? Do we actually start practicing it? We don't. Most of the time we don't. So that's where, if you really want change to happen, then we need the support of art. And that's where I always say that, I'm an art for change advocate, because I feel that art has that ability to create a kind of a climate of sensitivity in which change is possible to happen. And that has been the ethos of my life, something which is the raison d'etre, you could say, of my life. And I've always felt that with that spirit, if you look at problems, and something that Hemlata was mentioning about empathy, when I work with actors, the first thing I tell them is when you're trying to portray the character, you have to start empathizing. For any artist, if you're drawing something, if you're writing something, if you are playing a role, you have to start empathizing with that character, because you are not that person, you are not that story, but there should be a part of you in it. So that starts with empathy, and that is where we are talking about this whole, mindset change, right? If it starts with this kind of understanding that it's not just their problem, it's also my problem, then only the process is going to happen, the change is going to take place.
Thank you. And a comment from Vinika, which is interesting at this point, is to the feminist theory perspective on leadership, which is transformational, imbibes feminine attributes of empathy, trust building, and relational aspects that all Debasmita and Himlata earlier you've both spoken about. Excellent. Now I want to introduce one other aspect into this conversation, and then we move on to we focus in on a few more specific things. So Anjali, you are a medical doctor. Now when we talk about STEM, always there's this the idea of gender imbalance in STEM. I think the focus often tends to be engineering and high tech, but as a medical doctor you would have seen also balance or the lack thereof in terms of gender in medicine. What is your experience there, and specifically in the very highly specialized field of oncology that you're involved with?
Yeah, so medicine is no difference. I think there is enough gender imbalance in the medical field too. Though we are seeing there are a lot of MBBS aspirant female students are going up year by year. That's the good news. I think it's all across. But interestingly, this gender inequality in the medical field is manifold. There is a very interesting study where a female heart attack patients, when treated with a male doctor, had a little less favorable outcome when rather than when they were treated with the lady doctors. So so the gender equality has much more implication in the medical world. For that example, even culturally sensitive countries like India, lot of female patients want to go to a female gynecologist, right? Even they prefer to be going to the female gynecologist. So here that gender disparity comes out very strikingly, where you have a less proportion of female gynecologists, especially in city we can see much more, but when you go to the tier 2 and lower cities, there are more male gynecologists. And so access to a affordable care has this gender component, which we sometimes try to miss out. And so many ladies don't prefer to go to a male doctors, and hence they postpone their postpone visiting to doctor, and may end up in trouble, especially with the maternity care programs. Other interesting factors is female clinicians, female physicians do not take up leadership roles. So when you go to any hospital, administrator, medical superintendent, or CEO kind of a role in a big corporate hospital, a lot of women are little hesitant, the women clinicians, right? In that case, a lot of decision-making power is always, it always goes in the male clinician hand. And it might have some other implication from getting a due attention to a certain departments, having some empathetic kind of decision making, and the holistic approach to the treatment, it might get affected. Another interesting factor is lot of these women leaders don't get interaction with the industry, industry counterparts. So very classic example was in gastroenterology department, a gastroenterology company. When they tried to do some laparoscopic designs, very few female doctors participated. So the kind of precision it was required for a smaller, female hand was not there. And in the end, few female doctors end up with more injuries. So there are many more facets for our, stepping back to a routine clinical practice than going out, taking the leadership role in the hospital ecosystem, having the industry interactions with these companies are, taking a toll in a bigger picture. Similarly, we can see the representation in a lot of international conferences. The statistic says that only 1 out of 3, female physicians do participate in international conferences, and they come out with a lesser publication. So I think gender equality has, especially in medicine, I think it has manifold implication, as we see in the other fields too.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Anjali. And, it's always interesting and shocking when we take a more nuanced look into specific professions. And, you've given some very interesting examples in terms of direct implications for the consumer. As you said, sometimes, when it's women patients being uncomfortable or not reacting as well to having male doctors. And then the other aspect was implications for the doctors themselves, instruments not being correctly designed for female hands, for instance. Very interesting. And thank you for those insights. And I'm sure some of this is new for a lot of our audience too. We've had one medical student from Australia, Sonakshi Yadav, who's reacting and saying that she absolutely agrees with you that there is in fact a lot of gender bias in surgical fields. So clearly this is something that that's important and that's impacting a lot of people. And Suraya has shared an article about the challenges the female surgeons face. So gender balance clearly imbalanced in many parts in your profession too. Okay, now moving on to remote working, because that's something that came up a lot. We had a few interesting comments on this from various people in the audience. We had one statistic in terms of, I think it was a BCG statistic that was shared earlier about how women are spending 15% more time, 15 more hours on domestic work than men are. There was a question from Dunia earlier about the lack of progress on childcare and whether that has impacted gender balance, at the time of pandemic. So let's talk now about remote working, because it's such an important thing that's come to us with COVID-19. Now, it was forced upon us by the pandemic. There were some early adopters, and then there were some reluctant adopters that we've been trying to, change on this for a long time. HR professionals like Anantika will understand this. They've, I'm sure, been trying to convince people. Well, it's happened. It's been forced upon us. Interestingly, with both positive and negative implications for women, and with some expected and some unexpected consequences, right? So let's talk through some of these. Hemlata, coming to you quickly first, because this is something that you've seen with your own folks at Siemens. So what's your view on remote working? Is it here to stay? And what has the impact been on women as far as you're concerned? And if you could just answer very succinctly, please, I want to make sure we get a few more opinions in. Thank you.
Sure, Vinita. Thanks for the question. I think remote working, as you rightly said, there were some early adopters and some late adopters, but fortunately, the COVID did not give an option to the companies, and they had to adapt to it. So I'm so happy about it, because I see a lot of benefit that it brings in. Looking at the benefits itself, I think I can look at some of the key benefits. The first one being, now it has opened a global and a more diverse and inclusive talent pool. Now employers can look for talent pool, leaving aside the geographical barriers. So it's now a more open space when they're looking for talent pool. They are no longer restricted to the geographies. So that's one big advantage it brought in. And also many of the people who could not get into the mainstream working, like people with disabilities or women with more caregiving responsibilities, they also have now an option to get into the mainstream working, and this increases the talent pool that is available for the companies. So this is one of the biggest advantage I see with remote working. The second one being a big cost saving for employers, because real estate is something that always puts a big dent in the cost of the company, and now they would be able to greatly optimize on this real estate cost and use this money on investing on employees for their training or personal development and other stuff, right? So there's a big cost saving element that comes in. I also see an increase in productivity, like unplanned leaves should reduce, because before, if somebody was not feeling little well, they had to take a leave, or if they had some small task to be completed, and they used to go for unplanned leaves, emergency situations and things like that. But now they would be able to address it and then get back to work. So unplanned leaves would reduce, and with flexible working, I think the productivity will surely increase, which I've already seen in my company, that the productivities have shooted up during this remote working. And the fourth important point is, I feel it will be a big add-on for the employee retention and satisfaction. With flexible working, people have more able to integrate their work and their personal life more well. And then the kind of the new policies that HR is coming up and the new trainings and other modules, I think the employee retention and satisfaction is also going to improve a lot. So as I say, there is lots of win-win for both employees and employers with this remote working. And being a win-win, I think it is something that is going to stay. And looking at the impact for women, I think I see it as a very positive thing, because most women were looking for this flexible working model, and which like many companies were hesitating to provide, or women were hesitating to ask for. And now with this remote working, I think they will be able to jump onto the main workforce, and so the gender gap should reduce. And with this remote working, there is more stress on empathetic leadership, and that should also get more women on leadership roles. So I see it as a big win for even reducing the gender gap and getting more women on the leadership roles.
Thank you. Thank you. Absolutely. Many positives to this, and we're also getting some reactions there. But, just to make sure that there are some negative implications to this also, as I'm sure, we've all been reading. For one thing, as I think Pooja made the comment about 15 more hours that women are putting into domestic work as compared to men. The whole dreaded second shift, you do everything that you normally do at work, and you're expected to be able to do everything that you normally do. But at the same time, you're also managing often children who are at home because they can't go into school because of lockdowns. To Dunia's point earlier about the lack of childcare facilities, elder care in many countries also, becomes something that women have to end up doing. And hence, yes, there have been many positives that will continue. But with the awareness, I think that we must all have that there are negatives to this too. And unless, again, the family kicks in, and unless everybody kicks in and does their bit, it might then end up being a further burden on women. Right? So we have to understand both aspects to it. But yeah, absolutely agree. Some great positives.
Just
here.
one point, Vinita, there.
Sorry.
Yeah, can I just add in? So I think when the post-pandemic, when the office opens up, I think we need to make sure that HR policies are drafted in such a way that flexible working is fine, but it should not happen that men opt for working from office and women opt to work from home. And this creates a two-tier kind of setup where people who go to office are seen as more royal employees, and people who are working from home are seen as the next category. So I think HR policies will bring in lots of impact. And with the current, I think, empathetic leadership that is being demanded, and HR companies understanding the demand for caregiving, I think there will be more synergy, and this should help to draft better policies and improve the situation.
Right, absolutely agree. But policies, a lot needs to change. A lot will change. I think HR professionals are getting busy with that already. Bhavna is talking about the fact that also women need to be more vocal at the workplace, because women need to engage in enhanced personal branding, because you're working from home, your work may not be as visible. Quickly to Debasmita now, again, to try and bring in a slightly different aspect. Now, you're the quintessential digital nomad, right? You've worked remotely, you've done flexible work before this, etc. Has the pandemic had any impact on you from the work from home aspect at all, or has it just been business as usual? Because you're sort of, you epitomize many other such people, right? We have young people who are digital nomads who work like this anyway. So your comments quickly, please.
Yes. In terms of work, it really didn't bother me directly, because I am a digital nomad. My favorite line is, can I just go to the mountains and all I need in my life is a strong internet connection and a laptop. That's it. I don't need anything else. But having said that, the impact was a bit more indirect, because even though I work from, digitally from different places, but I work with publishers or with film industry. So those industries were heavily disrupted. Their work was heavily disrupted. So that definitely created a kind of an impact. Now, having said that, I really believe that, something that Hemlata was also mentioning, that this whole concept of flexible working hours, and there have been research on this, that it always shows that it helps a lot. This whole we have this idea in our head, and maybe probably it's because of this colonized mindset that we have, that work is supposed to be work, which is confined to a certain time limit, which is confined to a certain space. This is our mental construct, I mean, we can actually get out of it. And thanks to COVID, fortunately or unfortunately, we have been able to understand that work doesn't have to be that kind of, it doesn't have to be time bound or space bound. It can work from anywhere, and you have that flexibility. I mean, before COVID, I remember I used to have so many meetings where people would say, oh, I'm always traveling, I can't manage time, da, da, da. But now with COVID, there was no other option. So they had to look for alternatives. And with technological advancements, meetings are possible to happen. You don't have to really physically go to some place. So the point is, there are alternatives available. Sometimes we get so comfortable in our own zones, in our own ideas, that we think there are no alternatives available. But these kind of situations make us more creative and give us those opportunities to understand that probably what we have been doing was not absolutely right, and we can do things differently.
Okay, thank you. Simran has just told me that we have a question coming in from somebody in the audience. Hagen, I think. Go ahead, Hagen, please. Of course, Simran, I hope you're going to allow us a couple of extra minutes then. I'm aware we have exactly 1 minute left on our clock. So are you giving us a few more minutes? Shall we continue?
That's
I do want to take...
fine. No, I think it's good to hear the men in the room as well. And Hagen typed in a good question, so I said, why don't you ask? And
absolutely,
put the spotlight on you now.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much for giving me the stage. So just a brief question, and I'd be happy to listen to what the panel has to say, but also if there's maybe one or two people in the audience who'd like to comment. So I'd like to hear the answers or your replies to a very simple question. Is now there are a lot of men in powerful positions in business. What can we do? How can we contribute to all this? What do you think what we should be doing? I'm curious to hear as many replies as possible from the panel and from the audience what men should be doing to contribute. Thank you.
Hagen, thank you so much for bringing it up.
I'm sure you'll get lots of responses. First of all, Hagen, thank you for a brave question, and especially for asking it with so many women. You know, normally I always balk at being the only woman in an all-male panel or the other, but this has been unusual and quite interesting. Okay, so who's going first? Who's going to react to that one? What can men do? Anjali, go ahead.
Yes, so I think you can be our mentors, and tell us what are the best practices to be, we should imbibe to climb up the ladder. And, you can be our true mentors, to tell us how we have to, what new skills, how we can upskill ourselves to become leaders and, to get those positions, be authoritative. So I think that's how we are looking forward to you people. Thank you.
I have one. If I can go. I guess, I mean, other than everyone's talking about being a male ally and obviously encouraging women, I think it'll be great if you can encourage the men in your teams to take paternity leave, take time off, make sure that the stigma of men taking time off to be at home to take care of the families is taken away as well. Set an example for that, please. I think that's super important.
Excellent, very good response. In fact, I can speak to personal experience. We have people from consulting firms come in to talk to our MBAs all the time. And I'll always remember this one consultant who came in, and I will not name the consulting firm, but he told us, and I think I mentioned in a pre-panel discussion also, he mentioned that, oh, guys, I have to hurry up because I need to leave at 12:30 to pick up my son because I work only part-time. And he was a partner in a big consulting firm. I think that in itself went a long way in convincing a lot of people to apply for that job. So yes, men can certainly do that.
Melinda Gates talks in her book as well, right? When Bill Gates started to go to pick up their daughter, the whole school, I mean, all the other mothers started insisting and telling their friends, telling their husbands that, Bill Gates is coming and picking up the kid from school. You better go and pick up the kids from school as well, right? So I think, yeah, setting these examples has a huge impact.
I would like to jump in. I think what the first or the critical part which men can do is trying to remove that unconscious bias which exists so strongly in the corporate world, especially, and it's in every a step, whether it's in promotion, whether it's in pays, increase in pay grades. It happens everywhere. Even in a very basic, conference or a meeting, one can see if a question or an opinion which is raised by a woman may not be heard, but if the same is done by a man, it is heard. So while it may not be in all cases, but yes, there are huge number of cases. So I think the underlying bias which exists is something which is most important, because other things like, childcare, etc., a lot is happening, on that front. But this piece really needs a lot of attention. Thank
I'm
you.
just going to quickly jump in, and I would just add on to what Niti has just said. So to remove the bias, if we not only we have people who are like, people have said that you can act as role models, not only that, a strong message in terms of policies need to be communicated in terms of gender neutrality in organizations. A communication policy in terms of gender neutrality, meritocracy based. Rather than acknowledging gender too much and emphasizing the bias, it should be a more gender neutral communication spread across. So that's
Absolutely.
a huge message if it comes through policies, because eventually policies get translated into things that get done.
Yeah.
Just
Just a quick idea there.
One point, one point, if I can jump in. So I completely agree with the unconscious bias concept, and also I think the scale of measurement for the performance, right? So I think it's very men centric. So previously we had more men in the organizations, and so how you assess the success or the achievements are all very men centric or men focused. I think there is a great need to come up with a new set of metrics and new way you would assess the performance or the achievements of the employees. I think once the scale changes, I think we'll see more women grow in the career.
Absolutely. So we had lots of wonderful responses to Hagen's question, but we do have to wrap it up now. Hagen, I'm sure there'll be people reaching out to you with more responses on that one. Wiley has also shared an article that we wrote at INSEAD Knowledge some time back. And this came out in, with a panel discussion that we had where I was the only woman and I was talking to 4 men. And interestingly, of the 4 men, 2 of the men were actually the leaders of the women's diversity network in their respective organizations. So I thought that was a perfect example of the role that men can play. You don't have to support us. You just have to be there and make sure that everybody understands that we're all equal and equal opportunities are important. So I want to quickly now, on behalf of the INSEAD Emerging Markets Institute, thank our panelists and all of you wonderful people for those comments and questions. I've learned a lot. I'm sure everybody else has. And I think even as we look at COVID-19 and worry about when it's ever going to get past us, this too shall pass, I think. And as long as we're all together and we are positioning ourselves for post-COVID recovery with a fully engaged workforce, irrespective of gender, and with an eye towards sustainability in the long term, then we are going to get past this and we're going to be the world we all want to be. So before I hand over to Simran, I just want to say thank you personally for having me here. Empower Women of India, great work. So excited to see our alumni doing something so fantastic, and more power to you. Over to you, Simran.
Thank you so much, Vinika. I'm so glad that we met because of this event. Thank you so much for leading the panel so beautifully. And it just went by so fast. Thank you, everyone, all the panelists. I really, really enjoyed the discussion. And yeah, somebody just this week asked me, what do you want people to take back? Think about it in the closing. So yeah, just a few points based on what we discussed as well. I think, of course, this was a very, very deeply intellectual discussion, and this is what we at Power Women of India also aspire to do: give these platforms, give such a platform more to women leaders. All of you are such great trailblazers, and we want to see you all speak more, hear your voices more, give you more opportunities to be on such panels. And yeah, I think some of the topics that we discussed, especially in the first panel, I read yesterday about that women hold the power to the purse. So yes, going back to the point that Urvashi made, right? So a lot around consumerism is a lot also in our hands, right? So I think, and we also are more empathetic research shows, not me, towards the planet. And I do believe we can absolutely bring about change. And as men and women, we can lead empathetically. A few years back, probably people would have been shy. If you are an emotional leader or if you have a different leadership style, there was a leadership style. And now during the pandemic, we've seen how the world leaders, and my role model is Angela Merkel, and how they've all led some of their countries so successfully. So we can strive, we can influence, we can inspire for a much more equal workplace and a much more equal and fair and sustainable world. And Hagen, thank you for asking this question. I know that the chat box was bombarded, but it needs a very brave man to ask such a question, right? To stand up, to join and ask a question. So thank you for showing up and having the courage to ask the question. And to all the men who have tuned in, I just want to say that there is going to be no feminism without you. So if it's about equality, we can shout and scream, but we can't do it alone. So we need you. And as somebody said beautifully, we need you to stand up, right? And bring in, Yosha made a very good point. So influence the young male minds, right? So that's what we need to change, which can hopefully change corporate cultures and the workplaces. And to all the women who've joined, let's continue supporting each other, right? The reason I founded this last year was I was looking for a support network. And back then, of course, now with the Black Lives Matters, lots of great movements have come up. Back then I couldn't find one, so I ended up founding one. And so let's support each other, let's help each other, and let's rise together. And let's be the change that the world needs today. And yeah, anything that you all want to know about what we do, please check our website, powerwomenofindia.com. Reach out to us, you can drop us a note. And I'm so excited. This was our first one that we've done, not in the community, but more open. And we look forward to doing something in February around women in investing. And we'll be back to you all with more details on that. Thank you everyone again, to the panel, the audience, and Vinika, especially to you.